Hey guys, how's it going? I hope you're doing well, and welcome to another solar baits video. So, you might notice that this is not the pike swim bait that I promised on my previous video teaser thingy. And the reason for that is that I kind of miscalculated how much time and effort it actually takes to complete that one. So it's still going to happen, but I kind of wanted to have some sort of a mental reset and do something completely different and actually have a video out so that I don't have too much of a gap between posting stuff here because, you know, I like doing this. Anyways, in this video we're going to be making a jitterbug, and it's going to be made completely out of wood. I just wanted to try if I could pull it off, and well, let's see if I can. The lure that I decided to make in this video is clearly inspired by jitterbug, and the jitterbug is a very famous, really old-timey bass lure from the United States. It's made by this guy called Fred Arbogast. He had a company in Akron, Ohio. And like most of us, he began making his lures from home, probably his garage, I would imagine. So Fred started making his lures back in 1926, and believe it or not, his first lures were not top water, they were made from metal. The spin-tail kicker and tin liss were the first lures that Fred ever made, and actually became kind of famous because of them. The original jitterbug appeared in the scene in 1939, just before the Second World War, and it was made from wood. And it had this very unique and innovative swimming lip that made this kind of a plop 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 sound as the lure crawled on the surface. During the Second World War, when a lot of the materials became more scarce, a plastic version was introduced in 1941, and during the war it also sported a plastic lip and tin lure hangers due to the shortage of aluminium. Back in those days, the most popular color was black and a frog pattern. Throughout the years, Arbogast company has produced a whole bunch of different versions of the jitterbug. And I think even until today, this is a very innovative and unique lure design. And on top of that, this is a really fun lure to fish with. So I would actually encourage you to go out and buy one of these things, because you still can, or you can just make your own like I am. So there you have it, a little history lesson on the jitterbug. So what I've been doing so far is I've started shaping the lip, and this is made from a very dense and hard wood called snakewood. And I gotta be honest, this is kind of a pain in the ass to work with, but it does look very pretty. And here I'm using the Dremel tool to gouge out kind of a cup for the lip. I think you could probably use a gouge for this one if you happen to have one, but it is fairly dense and hard wood, so I'm not sure which method is actually the fastest. I just had this handy, so I decided to use the power of electricity. So now that I have the rough shape done, I'm just going to use some elbow grease and finish everything off with some sandpaper, going from grit 80 to all the way to 400. Alright, so my original idea going into this lure was to make it completely out of wood. No paint, no nothing. So that also means that I need to make the eyeballs out of wood as well. So I'm gonna show you a really quick way to make dowels, because we're gonna have to make two different sizes of those in order for me to make eyeballs. So what I need to do is make a jig, and I'm gonna start off by ripping into this piece of maple and basically splitting it in half. Alright, so next I'm gonna drill a hole through my ghetto jig, and you want to make sure that the jig is actually square before you start doing this, and also you want to make sure that it's actually clamped into place and it doesn't move around when you do the drilling. Because at least in my case, I think the drill bit that I'm using is slightly warped, and it's making the wood burn, which is kind of annoying, but what can you do? So now that the holes are done, I'm just gonna head down to my table saw again, and I'm gonna start taking small slivers out of the top, because we actually want this hole to be exposed slightly. I didn't want to use my table saw to completely expose the hole, because sometimes, at least on my table saw, there's a little bit of a wobble on the blade, and there's always a chance of actually exposing a little bit too much. So I decided to use my belt sander to expose the rest and make this very nice and accurate. So now our dowel jig is pretty much done, and I can start moving on making the dowels. And for the eyeball itself, I'm using maple, and for the inner part, which is the pupil, I'm going to be using wenge, which is a really nice dark African wood. Before I can start feeding them through the hole and making the dowels, I need to make sure that they're kind of more rounder, because that makes the whole process way more easier, and you're gonna get much less of splitting, which might happen with hardwoods in particular. Maybe not so much with softer woods, but hardwoods are definitely not so forgiving. So I would definitely recommend doing this part. So how does this jig even work? Well, let me show you. What I have here is a 1-inch flathead chisel, which is of course sharpened. It's clamped on top of that hole, exposing the hole slightly. And then I will just use my drill to drive through the hole, and the chisel is going to cut away the excess wood. Pretty simple and pretty effective. Alright, next we're gonna drill a hole through that small piece that I just cut off. And this is going to be that pupil hole for the wenge wood that I'm going to be inserting into that hole later on. Now I'm going to mix up some 5-minute epoxy, and I'm going to glue in the two pieces into each other. And then we're going to start making the eyeballs. Once the epoxy had dried enough, I started shaping the eyeballs themselves, and I just started with a utility knife just to get that dome shape, and then I finished it off with some sanding paper afterwards. While I was making the eyeballs and the lip, I was also making the body at the same time as well. And I had found this really nice piece of lace wood that I wanted to use on this lure. And I was like, yeah, this is gonna look awesome. I think it's gonna be a killer look. And then I finished the lure, and then this happened. The bloody thing sank. So what had happened is I miscalculated the density and the buoyancy of the lace wood, and it just sank. So I was like, oh my god, what am I gonna do next? Am I gonna just throw this away? Am I gonna start all over again? What should I do? And then I just gave it a couple of hours, and I was like, you know what, this is not going to defeat me. I'm just going to make something else and start all over again. And I chose to use some walnut, because I knew that it's fairly dense and hard, but it's also pretty buoyant, and I bet that that's gonna work. So that's exactly what I did. So I just sawed off the lip out from the lacewood body, kind of cleaned it up, and then stripped it out of epoxy. once I had cleaned the lip reasonably well, I started working on the body, and I actually had kind of a small strip of walnut that I just glued together, and I just started tracing out the outlines and sawing off the excess with my bandsaw. After the rough shape was cut with the bandsaw, I moved on to my disc sander to finish everything off and make everything nice and smooth. The very first Arborcast jitterbox didn't have a joint, but some of the later models did, and I wanted to have a joint on my jitterbug copy. And the way that Arborcast made those joints is fairly unique and interesting. Picture it as a pentagon that has been sliced in half and then stuck upside down, so that I think perhaps maybe it's designed to catch more water into the joint, making it wiggle more. I have no idea. I just wanted to test it out, see if it has any positive or negative effects on the action. But I also didn't want to copy it completely, so I just decided to go with an upside down V-joint. I think maybe from previous clips you might have noticed that I have a dovetail joint on my lip. And next what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a accommodating mortise hole so I can slide that dovetail into the slot and potentially make this a little bit more secure. Honestly, I'm not really sure if this is really that necessary, but I just wanted to make one because I don't want to screw anything through the lip like the original jitterbug has. And yeah, I'm just going to use this small little push chisel that I made specifically for a small little task like this, and I'm just going to make that mortise hole for it. Now I have all the joints done and I can start shaping the lure. And I actually didn't want to have any kind of plan or lines to restrict myself. I just went with eyeballing it and just went what felt right to me. So this is kind of like a, I guess you could call this like a raindrop shape, maybe? Yeah, something along those lines. Now that we have the overall shape done, I'm just going to start rounding things off with my utility knife and then smoothing everything out with sandpaper. Alright, next I'm gonna drill the eye sockets, and I'm actually using Forstner bits for this because I've found that the normal brad point drill bits that I have at least leave this kind of like a dimple on top, and the Forstner bits that I have make the bottom of the hole completely flat, which means that the eyes are going to fit into those holes much better. Alright, next we're going to do something a little different. In this jar I have not kimchi, but white vinegar and iron oxide, aka rust, which I have accumulated into this mess from cleaning various metallic parts from rust. And some time ago I learned that this has very interesting effects on wood when applied. For example, lighter tone woods will turn gray, giving them kind of a weathered look, and on darker tone woods like the walnut that I'm using, it will turn them completely black. So I'm just going to use this as my paint. And the cool thing about this sludge mixture is that it doesn't turn the wood black right away. It's kind of like a gradual effect, which is pretty cool to witness actually. But yeah, the goal here is to try to emulate that snake wood pattern a little bit, although it's pretty difficult to do. But yeah, I'm just gonna give my best shot and see where that takes me. Once I was finished with my painting, air quotes, I decided, you know what, this is a little bit too dark for me, so I just want to take a little bit of that black effect out and make it more transparent, which in retrospect might not have been a good idea, but I did it anyway. After my painting was done, I decided to split the two halves and separate them, and I just used my pull saw to do that. After that, it was time for some more sketchy hand drilling. And yeah, I'm basically just drilling the holes for the screw eyes. And after that, we can start gluing the eyes and the lip into place. Alright, now that I have all the parts glued in and all the hardware is in place, I can start covering this lure with epoxy. And I'm still using True Coat epoxy. I think it's the best lure epoxy out there at the moment. And yeah, I decided to give this lure a couple of coats. I think that should be good enough. And also, if you're wondering about the other lure turning with this, it's basically just there to counterbalance my drying wheel. In order to keep up with the vintage aesthetic of this lure, I decided to use cup washers in junction with the screw eyes, because a lot of the old-timey lures had them, and I haven't had too many opportunities to use cup washers in the past. So I was like, yeah, of course, this is the perfect time to use them. And in order to make them fit better, at least in my opinion, I decided to use countersink holes for them. So that's what I'm doing now. And of course, this is again highly sketchy because I'm doing it in my hand, and apparently a lot of people think this is dangerous. Dangerous! Alright, so the very last thing that I need to do before I can start testing this and see if it actually sinks or floats or what have you, I need to glue the hardware in. And I'm just gonna use 5-minute epoxy to do that. And here we have the whole lure in its full glory. And I gotta say, I'm pretty happy how it turned out. Spoiler alert, it actually works and it does float. So after this, we're gonna head out to the bathtub again, the infamous bathtub. Although I'm actually going to take this into Kananaskis not too long from when this is going to be released. And I'm gonna test it out. Probably not gonna film anything from there on. Maybe I will. I have no idea. We'll see. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this vintage build as much as I did. I'm very excited to take this out for a spin and see if I can catch anything with this. Yeah, nowadays I don't really care about shooting fishing footage because it's extremely boring and it's a hassle. I just don't like doing it. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed. Like the video if you did. Subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and you can also support me on Patreon if you want. Links are in the description. See you guys on the next one.